We need, as leftists, to attack not so much inefficiency, but corruption. This is what state bureaucracies are replete with. I sympathize with your concern that the right should not steal the thunder of the efficiency narrative, but at the same time, if you look at the last 40 years since Thatcherism and Reaganism and so on, efficiency has never suffered more than by those who claim to serve it. Thatcher was all about whittling down the state, what Elon Musk has been tasked to do now. The narrative was we cut, and at the same time, if you ask them, all right, so who's going to do the work? Transfer all the state bureaucratic machinations, work to the private sector, which by definition, by assumption, is more efficient because of competition. Bullshit. Just, sorry, I can't find a more scientific term to describe it. The result of Thatcherism is that Britain has not built one reservoir in the last 38 years. They cannot build a fast train from London to Manchester, and they spent tens of billions, and now they had to cut it down to go from London to Birmingham. Why is that? Because these large-scale projects require, especially if they're going to be funded by the taxpayers, which is the only way they can be made, because the private sector, look, Elon Musk may be going now to the moon and to Mars and so on, but he would never have put forward, no private company would ever have done the hard work that NASA did for many, many years to go to the moon, right? So, by essentially creating an atrophy in the bureaucracy of the great liberal democratic states, they have stopped them from being able to do anything. The United States, there is no way, let's say that Trump, wants to build a super fast train from New York to LA. Let's be less ambitious. From New York to Washington. He can't do it, because there is no company in the United States that is capable of doing it. They want to build nuclear submarines, and they can't. They have all the money, they have economized, they have borrowed, and they put all the money there, but their shipyards cannot produce it. Why? Because they have lost the capacity. This efficiency narrative has depleted their capacity to produce anything. Compare and contrast with China, where there's a vast bureaucracy, and yet they can make things happen profitably, right? And efficiently. So let's not grant them that. Of course, we need, as leftists, to attack not so much inefficiency, but corruption. This is what state bureaucracies are replete with, and this is what we need. And their corruption is always the kind of activity that these libertarians never touch on, because they love it. So when, for instance, I mentioned before in my previous chat with you, when they printed 3 trillion euros in order to boost the European economy, how efficiently was that utilized? They gave it to the bankers, who gave it to their friends in big business to buy shares, to increase their share price, so that their bonuses would go through the roof, because the bonuses of the directors are linked to the share price. Now, if this is not a mind-boggling level of inefficiency, I would call it just straightforward corruption. I don't know what is. Now, you mentioned the Great Reset. Forget it. It's insignificant. It's just entirely with no substance. The point you started making was a good one, about the left, the center-left politicians being co-opted by big business. That is utterly correct. They don't need Davos, and they don't need the Great Reset. The Great Reset is just a little project to keep some people busy and being talked about. There's no conspiracy here. Or to put it differently, there is a conspiracy without conspirators. It's called capitalism. I call it techno-feudalism. But let me give you an example from my personal experience. As you may know, you do know, for about 5.5 months I was the Minister of Finance. And my task was to clash with the neoliberal libertarian, supposedly, they were not new, they were not liberal, they didn't believe in freedom. They simply wanted to push austerity down our throats and to appropriate as much wealth for their mates or for their bosses, to be more precise. In my team, I had some very smart, young men and women who had grown up through meetings like this, through the movements. They were part of the coalition of the radical left of Greece, our party, Syriza back then. They had good education, master's degrees and PhDs. They had a good Marxist upbringing in terms of their theory. And I remember, I'll mention one of them, not by name. Let's call him Costa. His name is not Costa, but let's call him Costa. He was the person who was, in my team, the most radical. And my greatest moral supporter in those meetings, when I would come out and my heart had sunk by what I had heard, he would be lifting my spirits and, no pasaran, and, as long as the people are behind us. One of the things we were working on with him was the electricity, power generation and distribution network. The Troika wanted, what happened in the end after my resignation, that our publicly owned electricity grid, production and distribution, to be cut down and cut up in different pieces to be given to oligarchs. Okay? We gave this fight, we lost, I went home. And for a while I have to say that I was so depressed that we started DiEM25 and so on, but I lost touch with many of the comrades from Syriza because Syriza stayed in government and did all that. Six months ago, I was walking my dog outside the house. And there comes a sparkling 600 EDFC Mercedes-Benz that took about 3 acres to park in the middle of congested Athens. And then comes out this young man. This young Costa. I hardly recognized him. His Armani suit was sparkling in the dark. His beard had gone. He looked suave. Okay? And he was actually nice to me. He said I looked like something the cat dragged in, not my dog. Because I was taking the dog for a walk, I was dirty, and it was midnight. And he said, Yanis. I said, Costa. And he nearly hugged me, but didn't. And he said, oh, I've been following you. As always, I'm always very impressed by what you're doing. And I said, Costa, what are you doing these days? He said, I'm the CEO of one of these private companies that inherited a chunk of our public electricity grid. And I didn't say anything to him because he knew enough to know what a bastard he was. So I didn't need to tell him anything. I just smiled. I said, well, good luck with what you're doing. He said, Yanis, look, I'm still learning a lot from you, he said. But Yanis, are you still insisting on this left-wing thing? I said, some of us are too old to change our spots. And I walked away into the dark. So, it's not the Gates, I said, it's not Bill Gates, it's capital.